So my name is Beth Fisher Yoshida, and I am the program director of the Negotiation and Conflict Resolution Masters at Columbia University. We call it NECR for short. And I'm very happy you're joining us today. We're going to be introducing in a moment my colleague and friend, Dr. Josh Fisher. But before we get to that, let's go to the next page if we can. We also want to tell you about other events that we have coming up, especially if you're in the New York area on these dates. This evening, we have a wonderful session with Dan Druckmann on his new book, Negotiation, Identity, and Justice. And I've seen him present on this topic before, and it's quite entertaining and quite interesting when he really connects lots of different parts of his illustrious career. And then in December, we have our semi-annual, or maybe we do it 3 times a year now, capstone presentations on Saturday morning, December 9th from 10 to 12:30. So if you'll be there, please let us know. And I think Kirsten is going to be putting links into the chat, the Q&A box, I guess it would be, or is it the chat box? Probably the Q&A. Yes, in the Q&A box so that you can click on those links to get to register for these events if you'll be in town. So another thing is that if you're interested in learning more about the NECR program after today's session at the end, if you stay on the webinar, you'll be joined by David Taylor Tomilty, who is our recruiting counselor, and then he will be happy to answer any questions you may have about the program and applying and so on. We are now accepting applications for the fall 2024 semester. So I think that's it for the housekeeping part of the session. One more thing I would like to say is that when Josh is finished presenting or during the course of his presentation, if you have any questions or comments you'd like to make, please feel free to put those in the Q&A box and we'll get to those afterwards. So Josh Fisher and I have been working together for many years, and Josh is one of those unique people that is a blend between the social sciences and the physical sciences, and he puts it all together. And we need more people like that in the world who can be interdisciplinary. And when you don't have that in one person, then you just put different people together on your team. But Josh has been doing some super interesting work around the world. And this past summer, he took students to Japan. He's also been working with Hiroshima University and the NERPS network that he will tell you more about. But without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Josh. And please feel free, like I said, to put your questions and comments into the Q&A. Thank you. Okay, Josh.
Excellent. Thank you, Beth. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's a pleasure to be with you all virtually. As Beth mentioned, I have been working for quite a long time in the integration of natural and social sciences, all toward the goal of furthering methods and practices for environmental peace building. And so today I want to talk to you about what we've been doing, particularly with Hiroshima University and a network of educators, researchers, and practitioners who are all focused on trying to build peace around the world. Before that, though, I want to give a special thanks to Beth Fisher Yoshida for hosting me and inviting me to share this with you, to Kirsten, Sharon, Lydia, and the SPS team for making this possible, and to each of you for joining us. So I'm going to start by sharing my screen for a bit, go through some slides, and then I hope we can have a good question and answer period or discussion. I hope you can all see my screen. Again, Josh Fisher. I am director of the Advanced Consortium on Cooperation, Conflict, and Complexity at the Climate School at Columbia University, which is a research unit at the Climate School that's focused on the intersection of peace, conflict, and sustainability, with the logic being that we can't have environmental sustainability if we're mired in conflict. Likewise, there's a peace building and conflict resolution dividend from efforts toward environmental sustainability. I'm also on faculty at the Negotiation and Conflict Resolution Program, where I teach environmental conflict courses. And I'm a specially appointed professor at Hiroshima University on peace and sustainability. So today we're talking about advancing peace, positive peace in Japan. The need for this comes out of a few places, which we're all well aware of. We are, as a series of communities in the world, facing certain real urgent challenges, such as climate change. In just a few weeks, we'll have the Convention of the Parties at the international community trying to advance action on climate change. We all are increasingly feeling the impacts of climate change, and we know it to be a real threat that particularly impacts marginalized and vulnerable communities. So we know climate change is a real issue. At the same time, we are facing what some are calling the sixth extinction event, or this massive and rapid decline in biodiversity around the world. And that's an existential threat because biodiversity is the real source of life on the planet. Biodiversity provides the ecosystem services that sustain human and all life on the planet. And so as we see declines in biodiversity, we see a real threat to the viability of life on the planet. And we're all well aware of the increasingly virulent and destructive conflicts that we're facing. It seems that every day more conflicts pop up and more intensity in those conflicts pops up. And this is a global challenge. Each of the active violent conflicts on the planet is itself a huge source of pain and duress and marginalization and destruction. And collectively, they present a real existential challenge to the planet. And importantly, to the cohesiveness of communities around the world. So we know conflict is also a huge challenge. And this fourth image shows that all these things intersect geospatially. So conflict, biodiversity loss, climate change, they're all being felt differently in different places, but acutely in some places. And this geographic coincidence of these existential challenges poses a real issue for sustainability and, indeed the viability of our human societies. And so it's in these areas, that there are real urgent needs for environmental peace building, and that's peace building that addresses the environmental drivers of conflict, and peace building that adds an environmental sustainability dividend to peace building efforts. So these areas are areas of the world where there's a huge need for it, but they also present areas where there's a huge opportunity to advance these complementary goals of building peace, stemming climate change, and stemming the loss of biodiversity. And so that's what we've been trying to do in Japan through this network. But importantly, how do we do it? We know there are these existential challenges. How do we manage them? Well, the Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs, are one international institution that we have that treats the world as a complex and interconnected system, sets out 17 goals to address these challenges in all societies around the world. And the 17 goals range from ending poverty and hunger to enhancing the sustainability of cities and communities and making life on land and life below water viable. And importantly, SDG 16, building peace, justice, and strong institutions. And we know all of these things are only possible through partnerships, which is goal 17. So we have this international institution called the SDGs that mobilizes the international community toward action. And the question is, how are we doing? We're halfway to 2030 when the goals will reach their terminus. So how are we doing? A report came out earlier this year asking that question, how are we doing? And it showed that in the first 5, 6, 7 years of implementation, the SDGs were really well adopted by a lot of countries, by the international community, by civil society, and really a lot of early action was made to advance the SDGs. The past 3 years, though, have seen the intersection of a bunch of these challenges that I discussed earlier that have stalled progress and unfortunately have led to some backsliding in how we're doing on the goals. To highlight this, or to really drive this, emphasize this, this is a dashboard of the targets that are measurable in each of the SDGs. Here, this graph on the right, with green being the international community and individual countries on track to meet the targets, yellow being progress, but more action needed urgently, and red being stagnation or backsliding. When I look at this graph, I see a pretty dramatic picture where we're really not on track to meet most of the goals. And the work that we are doing as I mentioned, has been backsliding a little bit, has been stalled by climate change, biodiversity loss, conflict, the coronavirus, and all the secondary and tertiary implications of that, issues around supply chain. All of these things have meant that it's more difficult to achieve or pursue the SDGs. And so we're in a pretty dire place in terms of halfway to the 2030 target and not a lot of progress being made currently. So the end of this report suggests 5 areas for urgent action that are pretty intuitive. Heads of states and governments should recommit to the goals, should accelerate and sustain action toward the goals. Governments should integrate targeted policies and actions to achieve each of those goals, strengthen national and subnational capacity, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, which are all, again, intuitive, sort of common sense. We know, in the initial design of the SDGs, these were a lot of the recommendations on how to implement. Halfway through, we're reiterating the importance of this. And this doesn't really actually tell us an important question. How do we do this? We know more or less what we're trying to accomplish and what we need to do to accomplish this, but we don't understand the mechanisms that enable that. So this is the real question. How do we advance progress toward the SDGs and the underlying principles of the SDGs? What are the mechanisms that enable that? Well, as I mentioned earlier, there is a network that is trying to answer that question of how. And that's the Network for Education and Research on Peace and Sustainability at Hiroshima University, or NERPS. NERPS has really committed itself to advancing knowledge and practice around the SDGs. And as you see here in Hiroshima University's 2022 SDG report, they take the understanding and the assumption that the SDGs start with peace and are really only achievable through peace. And Hiroshima University itself has dedicated itself and committed to being a university that is pursuing peace. And so this network started at Hiroshima University and has quickly expanded across Asia into Latin America, Africa, Western Europe, and the United States. It's really becoming a global network that really mobilizes resources, mobilizes knowledge, and co-generates knowledge toward advancing the SDGs and their underlying principles. As you see here in this slide, Hiroshima's created a Splendor Plan back in 2017, all toward establishing a new philosophy of peace and science for sustainable development, with the goal of creating a worldwide research and education center that's really a network rather than a physical space. But it's dedicated itself to the pursuit of peace, knowledge, to nurture well-rounded human beings, built on the principles of collaboration, and with continuous self-development or self-actualization. And so the NERPS initiative at Hiroshima University is a real convener and coordinator across different entities that are part of the network. It functions very similarly to AC4 that I direct at Columbia. And so the partners that have been convened by this network, particularly to focus on environmental peace building, include the Negotiation and Conflict Resolution Program, whose goal is transforming conflict on an interpersonal, community, and organizational scale. In other words, trying to transform conflict from destructive to constructive or collaborative dynamics. Teaching and leading knowledge development and knowledge dissemination around how to do that. AC4 is another network partner where we, as I mentioned earlier, are organized according to principles of conducting integrative research and practice on sustainable peace, constructive conflict engagement, and sustainable development. And a new partner in this network is the Sasakawa Peace Foundation, which is a Japanese foundation established in 1986 that works to advance international exchanges and cooperation around these same issues of environmental sustainability, people-to-people and human engagement, and collaboration, all with the goal of building the human capital and social capital needed to address urgent challenges. So how have we been working together to advance environmental peace building, advance knowledge, teaching, practice around environmental peace building? Well, I want to talk to you today about one initiative we've been engaged in that was piloted this past summer as a joint program between these educational and civil society partners. On the Columbia side, this took the form of a graduate class in the NECR program on collaboration in natural resource management. At Hiroshima University, it was a non-credit educational offering for graduate students. Sasakawa Peace Foundation brought in partners from around the world, from I think 10 or 12 universities around the world, all to come and go through a 2-week experience learning about collaborative natural resource management and how collaboration in environmental management can advance positive peace and the sustainable development goals. So I want to just give you a quick overview of what that program was and what it entailed, sort of the logic underpinning it. To start with, though, this really was a truly international experience. Here you see the cohort, including the educators and the students who came from around the world on the right. And on the left, you see the geographic spread of participants in the program. And it really was incredible to have really sort of the best and brightest of the students from the partner universities around the world come together intentionally to share their knowledge, to share their experience, and integrate that with some pedagogical tools that we shared as educators and experiential tools that we exposed them to or shared with them as we went around different field sites in Japan. So the logic of the course was really structured around how do we achieve the SDGs? Considering Hiroshima's stance and ethic that the Sustainable Development Goals are really only achievable through peace and peace building, we started with a heavy focus on SDG 16, peace, justice, and strong institutions. Hiroshima is an important place to have these conversations for the history and legacies of violence and conflict that Hiroshima experienced, as well as the legacy of sustainable reconstruction and peace building that the city, the prefecture, and the people of Hiroshima have all really taken up as the core of what that city now is. So we started with a lot of theoretical and conceptual work around what is positive peace, what do we mean by peace and peace building, and later we built in the environmental peace building component. We did this through some of the tools and resources in a book that I recently published on managing environmental conflict. And so the course was designed to give that environmental peace building aspect, give it an understanding of more traditional peace and to infuse traditional peace concepts with this environmental peace building component. As I said, Hiroshima is really the perfect place to discuss these issues. As you see here, a couple of quotes on the legacies of conflict and the transformation that Hiroshima has gone through. And it's not just historic. Now in the prefecture of Hiroshima, there are all sorts of new challenges associated with climate change, changing rainfall patterns, urban expansion, rural to urban migration, all of which are creating new challenges for Hiroshima prefecture to manage, and Hiroshima city and the cities surrounding Hiroshima in the peri-urban areas to confront. And so here on the right, you see some of the growth of Higashi Hiroshima, where Hiroshima University is. Over the last 20, 30 years, there's been a rapid increase in rural to urban migration, in industrialization and urbanization in the prefecture. And it's transformed a lot of formerly agrarian land into municipal and urban landscapes. And that's changed water balances in the region. It's changed water quality in the region. It's changed a lot of life and culture in the region. This is a region where there's a historical tie to sake making. So in this part of Japan, Saijo, where Hiroshima University is located, is the historic capital of sake production, reaching back hundreds, thousands of years. There's also in the coastal areas important oyster fisheries that are world class for the quality of oysters that are produced, and with changing rainfall, changing water quality, changing everything, the pH in the fisheries is changing, which it changes the life cycle of oysters, which threatens the viability of that, again, really ancient cultural practice and important economic practice. And so, yes, Hiroshima is a great location for the history and the historical transformation, as well as how they're confronting these new challenges. So again, we started with SDG 16 on peace, justice, and strong institutions. And here you can see the aspirational goal of promoting peaceful and inclusive societies for sustainable development, providing access to justice for all, and building effective, accountable, and inclusive institutions at all levels. Embedded in this is the concept of positive peace, which is more than just the absence of violence or conflict, negative peace. It's really that aspirational aspect of peace, which is ultimately leading towards self-actualization for all people. And so here the Institute for Economics and Peace has articulated 8 pillars of positive peace. There are different definitions, different ways of measuring it, but it's all that aspirational goal of achieving peace through self-actualization and achieving self-actualization through peace. So we engaged the students in the peace tour and in the graduate course by studying peace and conflict in Hiroshima. We were fortunate to overlap with the 78th anniversary of the bombing of Hiroshima, the atomic bombing. And so we were able to get the students, this international cohort, access to the Peace Memorial Ceremony. We got them tickets to attend the ceremony, where the diplomatic corps from around the world really took up the mantle of advancing peace and disavowing nuclear weapons. We also were able to invite the students to speak with some of the survivors of the original bombing. And the students were able to hear firsthand accounts of the aftermath of the atomic bombing, as well as the important peace building that the survivors do on a day-to-day basis, both in their home communities and on the international stage. And we complemented that with partners that were brought by Sasakawa Peace Foundation from around the world, from the Japanese International Cooperation Agency, JICA, that funds peace building and environmental management around the world, as well as the Meifa Luang Foundation in Thailand that is focused on building peace in the Opium Triangle, and building peace and environmental sustainability. So students were able to hear from the diplomatic corps as well as practitioners in the field on how we can build peace via environmental management. More than just this sort of high-level overview, we really wanted to make this a practical experience for students. And so we built in that environmental management aspect through technical environmental management pedagogy, teaching environmental management skills. And we did this, again, from a systems perspective, looking at integrated watersheds. Here on the right, you can see what a watershed is. It's really the sum of an area that contributes any drop of water into the hydrological system, starting in the mountains, flowing through the rivers, all the way down to the sea. And so we looked at watershed management in Japan to see how, given these challenges that Higashi Hiroshima and Hiroshima are facing with urbanization and climate change and all of these things, how stakeholders in the area are working to manage the mountain resources, the forest resources, the water resources, the urbanization, all the way to the fisheries. And to focus on this intersectional issue of, or this intersectional approach to peace building via management and management via peace building, we looked not just at the discrete goals that are relevant to life on land or life underwater, but we looked at the integration. What are the mechanisms in peace building that enable better environmental management? So we focused on a few SDGs, SDG 15 being life on land, where we looked at terrestrial systems in the watersheds. Again, that same report I highlighted earlier talks a lot about what SDG 15 is, but the goal is to protect, restore, and promote sustainable use of terrestrial ecosystems, sustainably manage forest, combat desertification, halt and reverse land degradation, and halt biodiversity loss. So we looked at what are the environmental management practices that enable this, and given the complex stakeholder interests and needs involved in these systems, how can we do it in a way that builds peace, that builds collaboration, and how can we use that collaborative action to further this goal? Just for the sake of time, I'll skip ahead a little bit to the practical aspects of this. So we engage students in field work looking at forest management and forest management on the mountain slopes, because the mountain slopes are really the headwaters of the water system, the hydrological system that provides the water for sake production all the way to the oyster fisheries. And so we looked at how historical forest practices had degraded some of the watershed and some of the water quality, and what certain civil society actors and forest managers are doing to rehabilitate some of those degraded areas and ensure the integrity of the forest ecosystems so that they can maintain groundwater balances that are important economically for not just the sake production, but rice cultivation and all of the agriculture that happens in the area. So students were able to hear the experience of these Japanese forest managers and discuss amongst themselves what's happening in their own countries, whether it's Afghanistan or Papua New Guinea or Thailand or Brazil. All of the geographies and systems represented in the student body, we were able to share these experiences and knowledge across countries. Next, we looked at sort of moving down the watershed from the high mountains and forests into the valleys and the cities. We looked at sustainable cities and what is happening at the city level and the municipal level to ensure water quality and deal with urban waste. Again, looking at the intersection of goal 11, making cities inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable. How does peace building enable that? And how does this further peace building? This is an important issue, not just in Japan, but around the world as we see the urbanization trends here globally. We have passed the point where the majority of people live in urban and peri-urban settings, and that trend is only set to increase over time. So getting cities right is really critical for ensuring the integrity of ecosystems around the world. And so with the students, again, we went to multiple sites, but we looked specifically at the cultural practice of sake production and how we can use sustainable city management to reinforce and strengthen that cultural heritage. We also visited state-of-the-art waste management sites where students were able to see on a very technical and practical level how the city of Higashi Hiroshima is managing its waste in a way that's not quite carbon neutral, but approaching carbon neutral, that's very low input, and that's a net energy producer. So the waste management facilities in Higashi Hiroshima are really, really advanced. The staff there are really expert and excellent, and they have an integrative interpretive center that describes the entire flow of waste through the watershed. So students were able to speak with waste managers, with industrial producers, and understand how water quality, how some of the inputs and some of the energy requirements are managed in a way that's more sustainable than some of the counterparts in other areas. Again, they were able to take some of these ideas and lessons, integrate with their own cultural practices, histories, their own local economics in the places they're from, and generate some ideas on how to incorporate some of these principles back home, and what lessons they've learned back home that could be used to further and advance sustainability here. And finally, we looked at the intersection of SDG 16 on peace with SDG 14, marine management, life below water. And here is an image of the Seto Inland Sea. Hiroshima City and Hiroshima Prefecture are really privileged to be in this amazing area of the ocean, where there's this really rich, thriving biodiversity, this really beautiful land and seascape, and the cities really go down right to the sea. So SDG 14, the goal is to conserve and sustainably use the oceans, sea, and marine resources for sustainable development. Again, we use the same logic. How can peace building further that, and how can sustainable water and marine management further peace building? We all know the oceans are in sort of a critical state with plastic pollution, with changing pH, with changing sea surface temperature. So getting this right, again, is really critical, not just for the viability of the ocean system, but for all the ecosystem services that oceans provide that sustain human life. So getting this right is critical. But again, we looked at this from the watershed approach, looking at the flow of resources and chemistry of water through that entire watershed, ultimately down to the discharge point in the oyster fisheries. And so we were able to speak with conservation NGOs as well as industrial producers in these oyster fisheries to see how the current state of the oceans is impacting their ability to conserve these resources and utilize these resources, and what they're doing at a collaborative watershed scale to try and mitigate some of the discharge from upstream, working with forest producers at the headwaters to try and mitigate some of the changes to water quality, water quantity, and water flows. And again, the ways in which they're using collaboration as a tool for peace building and a tool to further all of these initiatives. So we had this excellent sort of mix of classroom work and embedded field work. We rounded that out with synthesizing knowledge through group work. Each student, again, comes with rich experience and rich perspective from their own context. So collectively, that's a lot of knowledge capital and a lot of social capital that we can leverage to generate lessons learned. And that's what the students were charged with across this entire 2-week period. Their charge was to work in small groups to look at these intersections between SDG 14 and 16, SDG 12 and 16, SDG 15 and 16, or SDG 11, pardon me, and 16, with the goal of really distilling lessons learned for advancing policy and practice, both in Japan as well as in their home contexts. And so the students each day would meet as a group to discuss what lectures they had heard or what field sites they had seen, and what lessons could be learned or brought to bear for advancing those goals. And the students produced these 20-minute presentations that were absolutely phenomenal in terms of practical policy guidance for advancing the SDGs through these interlinkages and through collaboration. So what did we learn about environmental peace building in Japan from this experience going together? And more importantly, what do we know about how to advance environmental peace building more broadly? Well, two frameworks can help us understand that. First is collaborative governance. We all talk about collaboration, and we assume we know what we mean, but when we look at the mechanisms that enable collaboration, there are really three motors or three gears that have to be turning collectively in concert with each other in order for collaboration to be viable and to function. That's principled engagement, or the group of collaborating actors and stakeholders coming together to collectively define principles and rules and processes for engaging with each other. So you need, rather than assuming that we're all going to collaborate and it'll be great, you actually need some structure, some agreement on the underlying fundamentals of what collaboration means to me, what it means to you, and generating a collective understanding around what does our collaboration mean. And the second gear dovetails with that. It's shared motivation. So we can agree conceptually that this is what we're going to do, this is what collaboration means to us, but we have to have and continue to build the motivation to engage over a long period of time. A lot of collaborative initiatives start strong and then fizzle out. If we have processes in place to constantly refresh and reinforce the motivation to work together, we can overcome some of the collective action challenges that are problematic for long-term collaborative endeavors. And it's great if we can agree to principles, we can build this motivation. In the end, though, at the end of the day, it has to deliver benefits and dividends for me, my interests, you and your interests, and considering the challenges that we're facing, the environmental integrity of our systems. So unless we're actually using collaboration to generate those benefits, then the collaborative endeavor is really, really threatened or unviable. And so each of these three gears has to be turning at the same time, and they create these positive feedback processes where the more benefit we gain, the more motivation we have, the deeper we understand each other. And so it's this positive feedback system. So collaborative governance is the first framework for understanding how to leverage environmental peace building for peace building more broadly, and vice versa. The second framework, though, is this framework on collaborative environmental conflict management. We know that we need these collaborative initiatives to move forward and for those gears to be turning. We also know that systems are constantly undergoing change and being exposed to internal and external shocks. And those shocks destabilize the system. So this other framework, collaborative environmental conflict management, gives practical guidance on how to navigate those cycles of cohesiveness, of shock, of reimagining the system or reorganizing the system in light of the new changes and those shocks, and building and maintaining the social capital to traverse these cycles of stability and disruption over time. So together, these two frameworks provide a lot of real relevant insight into the actual mechanics of how collaboration functions and how peace building can be sustained over the long term. So that's a bit about the experience we had in Japan this summer with this network of partners. And again, this is one initiative in a much broader and larger collaboration across the network of partners I initially introduced. And so how to get involved? Well, there are a few opportunities that are upcoming that I want to share with you just as a last point. The first is the NERPS conference in Hiroshima, Japan in 2024. This will be our fourth annual conference of all international partners, including students, policymakers, academics, researchers, and practitioners. Each year we hold this international conference. One year will be in Hiroshima, in Higashi, Hiroshima, at Hiroshima University. The next year it'll be at an international site. So the first year, Hiroshima. Last year, the second, the first 2 years were in Hiroshima. The third year, pardon me, was in Thailand at the Asia Institute of Technology. This year, we're returning to Hiroshima again from March 6th through the 9th. The website at the bottom is how to get involved in that conference, how to submit an abstract or a paper, or to register to attend without presenting. But if anyone's interested in any of the stuff I've been talking about, we would love to see you in Hiroshima this coming March for the conference. The second avenue for those Columbia students who might be on the webinar is next year's study tour and course on collaborative environmental management in Japan. So again, we're going to return to Japan to discuss these same issues through an expanded lens, different site visits, and new integration of new partners. It will again be a very international cohort, so would love to see you there. This year, we're also building in a more expanded focus on collaborative governance and collaboration in marine management. So there will be sort of a dual focus this year with the opportunity to specialize in either the terrestrial system or the marine system. Again, the link at the bottom points to a description of this course, and would love to see some of you in Japan next year. And the third that's relevant but not directly connected to this initiative, for those who are interested in building your skills and knowledge around environmental conflict resolution, and again, for those of you who are students at Columbia, next semester, the spring semester, there will be a course on environmental conflict resolution hosted by the Negotiation and Conflict Resolution Program. This was a course that's run for about 12 years now, and it's really foundational. It provides a deep overview of and deep insight into environmental peace building, environmental conflict management, the tools, strategies, and theory that underpin this all. So would invite anyone who's interested to take that class as well. With that, I will stop sharing my screen and again say thank you to the NECR program for hosting me.
Thanks so much, Josh. So while Josh and I chat for a moment, it's an opportunity for anybody listening to please put in a question or comment into the Q&A box, and we'll have a chance to get to that. So a couple of reflections that I had as you were speaking. One is that I really like the idea of basing how some of the other sustainable goals can relate to number 16, to the peace, and you were showing a very integrated way of doing that. And then the other thing I noticed is that a lot of the actions that were called for, I think there were five key areas for urgent action, they were very much centered on what governments can do, right? And so we know that governments are actually made of people. It's not this thing that's separate from people. So I'm thinking like from a social, psychological lens of multiple levels of engagement. When you talk about motivation, I'm thinking about how does the government actually do what they need to do in motivating people to sustain what they need to sustain, right? Because the government can make an initiative or say we support X, whatever it is, but do you have ideas off the top of your head about looking at different levels? So it could be smaller municipalities. You did talk about urban centers really needing to step up their game in this area. And we know that violence has been centered more in urban areas than not. And so the municipalities or smaller groups or communities or families, individuals, any of those levels that you might want to comment on.
Yeah, thanks, Beth. Those are all really important points. And I think you're right on point in terms of, this multi-scalar aspect to it. So we need action at all levels. The question is, how do we achieve that? How do we advance that? And again, this, as someone who works in the natural sciences as well as the social and policy sciences, I always go back to the idea of ecosystems, where we look at an ecosystem as the total sum of organisms and entities and material in a system. and the patterns of interaction or the relationships among them. And those patterns and those relationships exist at small scales, organism to organism, person to person. They exist from small to larger scales. So this individual is part of this larger collective. The approach to studying and advancing action from an ecosystem perspective understands this multi-scalar and this nested aspect of society, and really reinforces that. And that framework on collaborative governance is important for describing the mechanisms that we can use to leverage that integration across scales. So, and this is really, similar or sympathetic to negotiation studies, in that when I, as a government, enter into a negotiation with another governmental agency or another country, I'm simultaneously representing my constituencies as well as being part of this group process of a negotiation. Whatever I do in this negotiation or in this policy decision has to work within the group dynamics. It also has to be something that I can actually sell and implement with my home constituencies. And so this framework for collaborative governance describes what the internal legitimacy of that nuclear group, how that coherency is built, and then the legitimacy back with my constituents. And it describes processes for enabling representatives, represented officials or negotiators or whomever, to enable the transference of knowledge and information from this nuclear group decision back to the home constituency in order to build momentum and build implementation. But importantly, that implementation is critical because for me to be seen as a good faith actor or negotiator, I actually have to deliver on my promises. And when we're engaged over the long term, we really need that sort of feedback both ways. And so me as a representative of, government, or again, whatever constituency, my role is translating this group process and decision-making back to my constituency, translating the action being done at all levels in my constituency back into this group process. My role is both facilitating that information flow, translating in ways that both sets of groups can understand, and identifying what's needed to spur action on both sides.
Great. So the thing that's really nice about, you said the collaborative governance framework, and the thing that's really wonderful about frameworks is they take all of these really complex concepts and actions and put it into something very simple to understand. But then, of course, you lose the nuances that you just went into in some degree. So inside of those three circles and how the positive feedback loops and how they act together, there's so much complexity in there, because the other side of motivation is, I think, sustainability. And sustainability comes through motivation and capacity and lots of other things that you've mentioned in there. So we did have one question. Do you want to say something on that? Go ahead.
Just quickly on that. You're right. The frameworks are useful and incomplete. And that's where the grounded knowledge of each participant was really useful in this context, in terms of bringing practical examples on what's being done, what's being implemented, how it's being designed, and how it's both being successful as well as limited. And that engagement across different stakeholders in different contexts was really critical for filling in some of the nuance that you mentioned that's not included in frameworks.
Yeah, and the other thing that, now that you're saying that, I'm also thinking about that these frameworks cannot be created without being embedded in the context of local knowledge, which is when you're talking about your grounded knowledge, is just informing other parts of it to see, number one, do they work? And then what else needs to be done, what's redundant, what's missing, and so on. Good. So we did have one question, and it's interesting because I guess you've stimulated so much thought that somebody wants to know if high schoolers are eligible for the summer program in Hiroshima.
That's an excellent question. That's an excellent question. As it currently stands, the Hiroshima program is tailored to grad students. That being said, we are in discussion now with some of the partners in Hiroshima, as well as through other collaborations that we have, on ways to engage a more diverse set of constituents. And so I'm just headed back to Hiroshima to design next year's program, where we'll be discussing ways in which we might be able to include, say, high schoolers. That said, the climate school does have great programming, and SPS also has great programming for high school students. So I'd encourage the audience member to look at those opportunities for K through 12 and high school programs at SPS and the climate school.
Yeah, I was going to mention the high school program because I'm pretty sure that they have different kinds of environmental programs and courses, and maybe even environmental conflict resolution. So good. Okay, we have somebody from Japan writing in. So I said, thank you for today's presentation. Greetings from Japan. As a Japanese, I was glad to hear that such on-the-ground efforts were actually being made in Japan. However, I also feel that SDGs have become a sort of buzzword in Japan, which everyone knows about and promotes, but does not take concrete action to achieve them. From your experiences of hosting these programs, were there parts where you thought that efforts are lacking in Japan to achieve the SDGs? I would say it's probably not only Japan, it's probably, well, that chart you showed with the green, the yellow, and the red. So please answer that.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. Very well taken. And yes, there are aspects of SDG implementation in Japan that are very strong. There are other aspects that are still to be developed, let's say. And for the student experience, seeing what's working well as what isn't working well was very important, because in those policy briefs that the students presented, the policy guidance was tailored both toward furthering SDG 16 and 14 in Japan, as well as back in their home contexts. And so you're absolutely right. There are a lot of ways in which Japan is struggling to achieve and fully achieve some of the SDGs. The ways in which we can leverage other experiences, whether it's from the student body represented or the participants that were brought in on the pedagogic side from, say, Meifa Luang Foundation, are really important for enabling a deeper dialogue around how to actually implement SDGs in Japan. And again, I think the audience member is right that a lot of SDG discussion is buzz in Japan, and it goes back to that first question on, we know what we're trying to do and we know what we need to do. We don't know how to do it. And so courses like this, as well as the experience that's happening on the ground in civil society organizations in Japan, that knowledge is really critical for answering the how and understanding the mechanisms that work in Japan or in the Hiroshima prefecture versus anywhere else in Japan. So that local knowledge is really critical, I think.
Great. I was thinking that there's a sense of urgency, of course, in doing what we need to do to stop the climate change that's happening and all the effects in the world. At the same time, we need to appreciate the complexity of the situation and the amount of time it took to create. Of course, it's accelerated. I think every year it gets faster and faster about how much it's eroding, but we need to appreciate the amount of time it took to create this dynamic and the amount of, or the number of actors or players involved, that the complexity there. And so I don't think anybody would say that it's something they don't want to do. Some people may deny that it exists, but I don't think anybody would say they don't want to do it. But getting people to coordinate on the how for a long, sustained effort is much more complex than I think people realize. And so, yeah, short-term little Band-Aid approaches, people can act quickly, but to sustain that level of engagement would take a long time.
Yeah.
So we have a few more minutes. Is there anything else you wanted to touch on that you didn't have a chance to go into during your presentation?
There's just one other question that popped up in the Q&A on what are the core difficulties experienced in Japan? An excellent question. Anytime we bring together students from around the world. There are language barriers, there are cultural differences. So a key aspect of this program is building a sort of meta identity as a cohort. So a lot of time goes into trying to understand each other's differences and the points of synergy. For instance, some of the students come from countries that don't recognize the diplomatic legitimacy of other countries, which creates a real challenge. The students are all interested and engaged and want to be there. And unless we deal with some of those, or at least make those assumptions visible and deal with them, then it creates sort of latent conflicts that can pop up in very innocuous places, like talking about waste management. So that, more than just like a linguistic barrier, it's really, we need to humanize each other as a cohort in order to make this program viable.
Yeah, it's good because, perspective makes a difference in the worldview. You say even talking about waste management. Well, some countries can blame other countries for creating more waste management, so that can get into that. But you also mentioned at the very beginning of your presentation how there are challenges, but there are also opportunities, which to me reflected a mindset, right? You can see the challenges, but you can also see the opportunities. I know some people do SWOT analysis. Do you do a SWOT analysis in your course?
We do. As part of the course, we do a positive peace workshop that is similar. It includes a SWOT analysis and then several other exercises leading toward policy recommendation development.
Oh, great, great. Okay, so I think that's all I have, and I don't see any more questions there. So some closing thoughts?
Just appreciate the opportunity to come and speak about these issues and these approaches. This is one initiative. There is a lot of real important environmental peace building work happening around the world. It's real passion of mine and something that I'm excited to share with everyone. So just thank you all for coming and listening, and hope to see some of you in some of those avenues for engagement.
Great, Josh. Thank you so much. So yes, and I think that the whole environmental conflict resolution piece, environmental peace building is growing and is also taking more precedence in Columbia University. We have lots of different initiatives and courses, as Josh mentioned. For those of you interested in that and more about the NECR programs, please stay on. I see that David Taylor Tumilty, our recruitment officer, is here. So he is here to answer any questions you have. And I think Josh and I will sign off, and thank you everybody for participating.
Thank you all.